Hello, students. Hope you all are doing well. Alright, today we are going to look into novel chapter 26, The Television Chocolate Room. But before we move on, let's just have a quick review to the previous chapter, The Great Glass Lift. So, in the previous chapter, the visitors who were left had an experience to go into the glass lift. It is entirely made up of glass, and you can see the things going beside or under or above anywhere you want to because it is made of glass and you can see through it. The Great Glass Lift is special in a way that it can move into any direction and is super fast. It had a lot of tiny buttons on either side with the names of rooms in the factory written on them. Mr. Wonka asked the two children to press one button each of their choice. So then Mike TV immediately presses the button of Television Chocolate Room. Now, I want you guys to go and read the chapter and then come back to watch the video again. I hope you got an idea of what this chapter is about. Moving further, I am going to highlight the main points of this chapter. As all the people left enters into the television room, they see that the room is so dazzlingly bright, which means brilliantly bright, that one can't bear to see without glasses. So, Mr. Wonka hands out dark glasses and tells everyone to wear them all the time they are present in the television room. Protected by the glasses, Charlie looks around and sees a long white room. It is bare except for a camera at one end, which means it's quite empty and you can't see anything except the camera at one end, which is surrounded by an army of Oompa Loompas and a television set at the other end. The Oompa Loompas near the camera wear space suits. Mr. Wonka excitedly explains that the room is for testing television chocolate. When Mike TV asks what television chocolate is, Mr. Wonka demands that he stop interrupting. Mr. Wonka thinks that television is bad, but in small doses it can be okay. He notes that children always want endless amount of it. Mike chimes in his agreement. When Mr. Wonka tells Mike to shut up, Mr. Wonka thank him and goes on to explain his interpretation of how real television works. Mike TV disagrees with Mr. Wonka, who just pretended deafness. When Mike persists, Mr. Wonka tells him he is a nice boy but he talks too much. Mr. Wonka imagines spreading chocolate into every home in the same manner that television is spread. Mike TV declares it's impossible. So, to explain him, Mr. Wonka does a demonstration. Six Oompa Loompas carry in a bar of chocolate the size of a bed. Mr. Wonka explains that the chocolate has to start big because, as with real television, things shrink to fit the screen. He then calls for action but halts it to implore Mike TV to stand back. Mr. Wonka explains the danger of camera and that the Oompa Loompas wear spacesuits to protect themselves from the rays again. Mr. Wonka calls for action, and the chocolate bar disappears. Mr. Wonka explains that it is traveling overhead in a million pieces and rushes everyone over to the television. Mm, alright. The chocolate bar appears on screen and Mr. Wonka tells the children to take it. Mike TV laughs at Mr. Wonka saying he cannot take a picture of a screen. Mr. Wonka then orders Charlie to take it and Charlie does so. Though he nearly drops it out of astonishment, Mr. Wonka tells Charlie to eat the chocolate while Grandpa Joe exclaims his amazement. Mr. Wonka explains he will use this television chocolate to advertise his chocolate directly into people's homes and hands. Grandpa Joe is astounded of Mr. Wonka's this invention. Alright, talking further, there are some of the phrases I want you to look at. In the beginning, the word dazzlingly bright. Dazzlingly bright means to shine or reflect brilliantly. It is quite a bright light which your eyes can't bear. Then comes a speck of dust. Speck means a tiny spot. There was uh, there wasn't a speck of dust anywhere in the room. It was so clean and it was so white that you can't even see a tiny spot of dust in that room. Then comes a queer sense of danger. Here, Charlie experienced a queer sense of danger. That means Charlie just had a feeling of unusual or odd sense of danger around him in this room. There is one more phrase over here which I want to tell you about is bare except at the far ends. Means it was empty except for the far ends of that room. It means that, as I told you before, that on one side of the room there was a camera, and on the other side there was a television. Nothing except for these two things were there, and of course the Oompa Loompas were there to work. Then on the last page, it's a word flickered. Now, flickered means to shine unsteadily, to twinkle or to sparkle. It usually happens with the TV screens to just shine and to twinkle, to sparkle after after a passage of time. All right. Now, moving on to the questions which have been given to you beforehand. The meanings of the four words, you have to write them down in the copy, and the three questions like before. The first question: what does Mr. Wonka explains about the television chocolate room? All right. Now, the television chocolate room, the explanation of this invention is given in detail in the novel. So I want you people to look into it and tell how it works. Like the thing which you want to send to the television, you are going to place it in the front of camera, and then the tiny pieces, it will fly up in the air, and the tiny piece and will turn into the tiny pieces, and then all the tiny pieces are going to be joined into the television and come together again, and then you can pick it up. Likewise, you have to give the explanation of how it works after reading the chapter again. Then question number 2: what does Mr. Wonka do to prove his invention to Mike? As we have read, Mike TV was not believing in this invention of Mr. Wonka, so Mr. Wonka demonstrate that how his chocolate television works. So to explain Mike TV, he called out the Oompa Loompas with a big size of bar of chocolate. He tells that it has to be big because the things go shrinking with real television to fit in. So Mr. Wonka calls for an action, and the bar of chocolate just disappears, and after a short span of time it just appeared on the TV. This is how you're going to explain the that how Mr. Wonka proved his invention to Mike. You have to write it in your own words. Do not copy from the novel. All right, the third question, the last one. Likewise, you have to make the sentences of the words present in exercise number one. All the four words given to you for the meanings, you have to just make the sentences of all of those words. So that's it for today. Thank you.